Well, welcome to another edition of the Mind of Christ. We are making our way through the life of Christ, everything Jesus did and said, so that we can understand how he thinks. And if we can understand how he thinks, perhaps we can become like him. We're following A.T. Robertson's Harmony of the Gospels, and he has divided up the life of Christ into sections. We are on section 65. And the title of this section is In Crossing the Lake. Jesus stills the tempest. Our reading is going to come from Matthew chapter 8, verse 18, and then 23 through 27. Let's read that first, and then we'll read the accounts in Mark and in Luke. We're reading from the New American Standard Bible because it is a very literal translation of the Bible. And it's a very excellent study Bible, and so I would commend it to you. Before I forget, if you are joining us for the first time, you can go to our website, centralsarasota.org, and you can find links to all the things that we've been doing for at least over a year. And you can find the links to the Mind of Christ studies that we've been doing every week. So let's begin to read. Matthew chapter 8, verse 18, it says, Now Jesus saw a crowd around him, and he gave orders to depart to the other side. And then starting in verse 23, the Bible says, And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm in the sea, so that the boat was covered with the waves. But he himself was asleep. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Save us, Lord, we are perishing. And he said to them, Why are you timid, you men of little faith? And then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. And the men marveled, saying, What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Over in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 through 41 is the same story, slightly different words. And on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, Let's go over to the other side. And leaving the multitude, they took him along with them, just as he was in the boat, and the other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so much that the boat was already filling up. And he himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And being aroused, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush, be still. And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. He said to them, Why are you so timid? How is it that you have no faith? And they became very much afraid, and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? And then in Luke chapter 8, we have the account again, same story, slightly different words, beginning in verse 22. And the story goes, Now it came about on one of those days that he said to his disciples, it came about on one of those days that he and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, Let's go over to the other side of the lake, and they launched out. But as they were sailing along, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind descended upon the lake, and they began to be swamped, and to be in danger. And they came to him, and they woke him up, saying, Master, Master, we're perishing. And being aroused, he rebuked the wind and the surging waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. And he said to them, Where is your faith? And they were fearful and amazed, saying to one another, Who then is this, that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? Okay. Well, as you can see, the stories are the same event, but there are different wordings in each one of them. Likely Matthew is the only one of these that were actually one of these three that were in the boat with him. The occasion, Matthew says, the crossing was the occasion when Jesus saw a crowd around him. And so when a crowd began to gather around him, that's when he suggested they go across the lake. They must have been pressing in too much. But in 13 and verse 2 if the crossing actually follows the parable section, he was already in a boat because he had been teaching, remember, from a boat. And so it's possible that he was already in the boat when the crowd was pressing in. So maybe the crowd was beginning to get into the water. They were actually walking into the water. Mark says, on that day when evening had come, so it's getting dark after a long day of teaching from the boat pulpit. He used the boat as a pulpit. Luke says, now it came about on one of those days that he and his disciples got into a boat. There's no real context here. So Luke is just descriptive, and I'm sure he is less descriptive and perhaps less aware of the immediate context of the story. As a side note, it's interesting to me that a scribe comes to Jesus offering to follow Jesus wherever he goes. This is interesting to compare with Matthew 13:52 about every scribe who becomes a disciple. A.T. Robertson contextually connects the two. Okay, that was just a little side note there. All agree that Jesus directs his disciples to go to the other side. Assuming he was near Capernaum, where would the other side be? Perhaps Gadara on the southeast. This is what Robertson says. So this would be the longest route across this lake. It would be several miles for them to make this passage. Mark adds that there were other boats with him. So were they all in one boat? If so, there would have been at least 13 men in the boat. Or did others follow him as well? Other disciples, perhaps. Mark says they took him along with them, like Jesus hitched a ride, I guess you might say. So it seems to be, number one, at night, number two, after a long day of teaching, and number three, with a small fleet of boats carrying disciples, and number four, crossing from north to southeast. So this sets the stage for the events that follow. Matthew says he gave orders to go to the other side. Mark and Luke quote him saying, let us go over to the other side. And Luke adds, other side of the lake. Matthew says that he commanded them. This is from Keleuo, Keleuo, means to order, to give a direct command. Matthew 14, verse 19, Jesus ordered the multitudes to recline on the grass. In Matthew 14, verse 28, Peter to Jesus said, if you command me to come to you on the water, I will do that. I don't want to make too much here, but it seems Jesus is seen as one who is in charge, in authority. But Matthew adds that when he got into the boat, they followed. He commanded and led, and they followed. But Mark says they took him along with them. And Luke merely says he and his disciples got into a boat, and they launched out. There's no contradictions here, but interesting the way the different writers paint the picture. Luke says that they were sailing along. The word here for sail is for sail. Would be, if I can put it into what a transliteration would be, it would be Pleonton, Peleonton. So the sail was up, and a fierce gale, as it's called, took over. It's a storm. It's a tempest, maybe even a whirlwind, a squall that came up, a driving wind and rain. Matthew uses the word, it would be ismos, seismos means gale. Could even mean an earthquake. It's a commotion. It's something seismatic. It's a tempest. Could even be a tornado. So that word is not very specific as to the type of activity. It says that the waves were breaching over the boat. It was filling up with water. Matthew says the boat was covered with the waves, and Luke says that they were beginning to be swamped and to be in danger. The situation was getting desperate, in other words. Some of the disciples were experienced fishermen, and accustomed to these storms. I would imagine the sail came down quickly so as to not be ripped. And remember, there were other boats filled with disciples going across the lake. Matthew says, but he himself was asleep. And Mark says he was in the stern, which is the back of the boat, asleep on a cushion. Luke says he fell asleep, and obviously tired from the day. This shows his humanity. We surmise that the sleep was deep, since he was not disturbed by the storm. But what follows here, here is to be looked at carefully in light of our walk through the world and the things that cause stress and fear. Jesus' reaction to the situation as opposed to the disciples' reaction to the situation. Matthew says, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." Mark says, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And Luke says, "Master, Master, we are perishing." Well, so there's three different appeals here. Master, Teacher, and Lord. Three different designations for Jesus, and all of them are accurate. And perhaps there were different disciples who were using different designations for him on this occasion. And there's three different appeals. One is save us. The second is do you not care? And then this finally a statement of fact. We're perishing. So it recognizes all of these statements, recognize his power. They question perhaps his goodness, and they also are facing the fact that they are in peril. The fact that they recognize his power, but they perhaps question his goodness, is a tension that is in their statement. In other words, if you are truly powerful, do you care enough, are you good enough to save us on this occasion? Well, this is a common condition. We are perishing. The idea of perishing here is to destroy fully, to die, to bring to naught. They thought the boat would be swamped and that they would be washed into the lake and drown. It would be the end of them and the end of Jesus' ministry if they were actually thinking that. Were they even thinking in terms of this could be the end of this ministry? Or was they just simply thinking, this is the end of our life? Well, the story illustrates a couple of things about human nature. When a person or a group are faced with a life and death threat, number one, a tension is created between power and goodness. Number two, our focus goes to self-preservation, away from the more important agendas at play. In this case, the plan of God to save the world through Jesus and the message of the apostles. Now, I don't know if they had been with him long enough to understand how critical it was that Jesus not die by drowning in a lake, and it was critical that the apostles not die by drowning in a lake, that they had a work to do. It is no concern that there are three different statements recorded, as probably all were shouting to Jesus in the confusion of the night. All kinds of things were being said to get Jesus' attention. One at least wondered why Jesus wasn't just as caught up in the chaos and drama as they were. How could he sleep at a time like this? Why does Why does their drama have to become his drama? Especially because he knows, number one, he can and will calm the storm. Number two, that they cannot possibly perish on that sea that night. God has a bigger plan that will supersede anything that is happening that night. But the struggle of the apostles is classic. If God is powerful, they believed he was or is powerful, then does he really care? Why does God sleep while we are perishing? Obviously, what seems like danger to us is not so dangerous to God. He doesn't get nearly as excited as we do in the same situation. The three accounts report Jesus' words just a little differently. Matthew says, "Why are you timid, you men of little faith?" Mark says, "Why are you so timid? How is it you have no faith?" And Luke simply says, "Where is your faith?" Also, Matthew records he rebuked the storm after he said it. Mark and Luke have him rebuking the storm first and then speaking to the apostles. Well, the idea of timid, the word timid, is from Delos, D-E-I-L-O-S. It means fearful or cowardly. Revelation 21 verse 8 says that there will be, the cowardly will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. And in 2 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and of love and discipline." So what causes us to be so timid? The easy answer in this context is fear of death. But that is the point. What is the full context? And if they had understood it, would they have had a different reaction? See Hebrews chapter 2 about the fear of death. When we ride the rides at the fair, and we feel a sense of fear, it is mitigated by knowing that the ride is designed to thrill and not to kill. What if the disciples had known this and had sat back and enjoyed the ride? If Jonah had known the outcome, he would have rode out the storm in the fish. So many stories in the Bible are about people in different circumstances whose outcomes are good, but the person going through it just can't see it or just does not trust God in the midst of it. Would it have been reasonable for the disciples to know this storm could not be the end of the story or of Jesus' story? Maybe, but they displayed timidity up to and including the resurrection and beyond until the Holy Spirit was poured out upon them. So is fear or timidity ever appropriate for a Christian other than fear of God? Is it like worry and anxiety, natural but not appropriate? Like sexual urges, natural but not to be but to be managed in view of faith? Running away, turning back, looking back, failing to face even the most terrifying of prospects in order to advance the kingdom of heaven. We certainly are tested to see what our faith is made of. James chapter 1. Or the story of Abraham and Isaac, the testing of Abraham's faith. What is my test right now? And how am I doing? What's your test right now? And how are you doing? There are three remarks about the faith of the disciples. First of all, little faith, no faith, and missing faith. Could Jesus have been addressing different ones? Could the gospel writer have been selective in which statement he recorded based on the perspective of the apostles? Matthew says little, Mark says no, and Luke says missing. And I'm not sure how significant this is, but I do believe the fact that Jesus focused on their faith is significant. Faith is such a key in times of crisis. A crisis is is always about a sense of helplessness or powerlessness. In these times, we have a huge need to trust someone or something. Trust is essentially believing the person you are trusting, and that he is able to do something to make me okay, to return me to homeostasis. But faith, for this to actually work, I have to understand a very basic truth. I am more than this worldly or human. I am a spiritual being having an experience, not I am a spiritual being having a human experience, not a human having a spiritual experience. So true homeostasis in life is not being okay, perfect, physically, financially, or even emotionally. Though God knows we need these things to be okay, spiritually we need to understand 3 John verse 2, where he says, "Beloved, I pray in all respects you may prosper and be good in good health, just as your soul prospers." Soul here is suke. It means breath, spirit, vitality, not unique to man. This is not pneuma, but there does seem to be a link between body and spirit in suke. When this link prospers, then there can be a sense of well-being that takes place in both regions, body and spirit. The temporal and the eternal, we are integrated beings. We have to live and function in the real world of storms that arouse the nerves and the brains and the physical sensors. Faith operates in the regions beyond the seen and the unseen. Faith bridges the gap and intervenes in the nerves to create a sense of calm and peace and assurance. But faith has to be about real help. Faith in a real God who does real things in real time, in real circumstances. This is outside of ourselves, but speaks profoundly to our hearts. Well, Jesus addresses the disciples' faith, and he also addresses the sea and the storm. He commands hearts, and he commands circumstances. Matthew says, "Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm." Mark says, being aroused, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. Luke says, and being aroused, he rebuked the wind and the surging waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. Well, Jesus was aroused, he arose, and he rebuked, and he made, which makes a good sermon illustration on the road to change. First of all, you need to be aroused, then you need to arise, and then you need to rebuke. Until we are aroused from our sleep, we will not arise or get up to rebuke the threat. The primary word is rebuked in this sentence. Epitimao, Epitimao. It means to set a value upon, to assess a penalty, to allege as a crimination, to reprove, to chide or censor, to rebuke, to reprimand, to admonish, to admonish strongly, to enjoin strictly. This word rebuked is used in Matthew 19 and verse 13 when the disciples rebuked the people bringing the little children coming to Jesus. It's also used in Luke 23 and verse 40. The thief rebuked his fellow thief for mocking Jesus on the cross. And in Matthew 12 and verse 16, enjoined them strictly not to make known. In other words, he warned them. Luke 17 and verse 3, if your brother sins, rebuke him, he says. Perhaps a good sermon. What needs rebuking? It is not for us to know how miracles are done. If thinking about what happened when a weather system, which is very complicated, can go from surging waves to perfect calm in a second, is really amazing. Low, high pressure systems, currents, tides, fullness of the moon, etc., all make it what it is. And when I was on the Sea of Galilee, it was very windy and the lake was rough. For a person to say a word, what Mark says, he said, "Hush, be still," and the forces of nature immediately obey, is amazing. To rebuke a person and they change is one thing, but to rebuke forces that have no free will is another. It seems Jesus did not even stop to think about what to do. He just did it. And did he seem at least a little aggravated by the disciples' lack of faith? This disciple's response, Matthew says they marveled, saying, "What kind of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Mark says they became very much afraid with the statement. And Luke says that they were fearful and amazed, saying, "Who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water to obey him?" A mixture of wonder and fear is a natural, honest approach to the works of God. His actions should promote that within us. The commanding of nature, which has no will, is not more persuasive. Is not more persuasion. It is raw power. Nature has no volition. So how can something with no will obey? Obey is the word hupakuo, Hupakouo. It means to hear, to listen attentively, to heed, or to conform to a command of authority, to hearken, applying it to things, or unclean spirits, or children, as in obeying parents, or slaves obeying their masters, or wives obeying their husbands, or to obey God, or to obey the gospel, or a spiritual leader, or to obey one's passions, leading to slavery. There's all kinds of senses in which this word obey is used in Scripture. It seems, in the scheme of things, the battle is for compliance, submission, control, obedience. Jesus is demonstrating that ultimate power and ability to bring about obedience is within him. If he can gain obedience from the wind and the sea, then ultimately he can do so in us, either through persuasion or through force. Thus in Philippians chapter 2, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. Question whether voluntarily or by the force of God's will, but it's going to happen. So obedience does not have to be voluntary to be obedience. Every power that enslaves, Jesus has easily overpowered. Whether it's nature or disease or death or evil spirits, he speaks that he speaks and things happen. When will we learn that such is why one responds to Jesus and should be one of faith, believing he is greater and more powerful than death, disease, demons, destructive natural systems, despots, dispositions, all bow before Jesus. All pay homage to him. He overcomes and he brings everything under his feet, ruling with an iron scepter. So, there is that section 65, about the storm and the calming of the waves. I have another section here. It is not quite as long, but I want to go ahead and cover it today. It's section 66. It's beyond the lake. Jesus heals the Gerasene demoniac. So we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 8, verse 28 through 34. Let's read that. And when he had come to the other side of the country of the Gadarenes, 2 men who were demon-possessed met him as they were coming out of the tombs. They were They were so exceedingly violent that no one could pass by the road. And beyond they cried out, saying, What do we have to do with you, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? And now there was at a distance from them a herd of many swine feeding, and the demons began to entreat him, saying, If you are going to cast us out, send us into the herd of swine. And he said to them, Begone. And they came out, and they went into the swine, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. And the herdsmen ran away and went to the city and reported everything, including the incident of the demoniacs. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they entreated him to depart from their region. We also have this story in Mark chapter 5, 1 through 20. And I don't think I'm going to read that one. It's also found in Luke chapter 8, 26 through 39. So I'll be referring to the differences in the accounts, but I'll let you read the account in Mark 5, 1 through 20, and Luke 8, 26 through 39. Well, Mark and Luke are the most detailed, but focus on one man, while Matthew says that there were two men. The explanation seems to be that the one man who had a legion of demons was so notorious that he overshadowed the other who may have received deliverance first and fled before Jesus encountered the second man. However, on second look, Matthew has them coming out together and described as violent and speaking together to Jesus, unless they refer to the demons and not to the men who were speaking. If this is the case, then one man may have been delivered first and fled before the other with legion was dealt with. But nevertheless, that's the three different accounts. The names seem different. Matthew says the Gadarenes, and Mark and Luke say the Gerasenes. Most believe the event took place in the Gergesa. In their day, it would be Kersa, Gersa, in the country of the Gergesenes, Gergesenes. The country of the Gadarenes is about the largest city in this country, and so Gadarenes is a city in this country of the Gergesenes. The region was known as Gergesenes, Gergesenes. Gadara was the largest and the best-known city. Gergesa was a small village, and so you can see the confusion among the descriptive terms that describe this area where they were. Some a broader picture, some very focused. The description of the man, the primary is the demoniac included, number one, he lived among the tombs. Number two, he was extremely violent. Number three, he was unable to be bound even with chains. He broke them to pieces. Number four, no one was strong enough to subdue him. Number five, he cried out night and day in the tombs and surrounding mountains. And I've been there. I've been in that area and seen where all of this took place. Number six, he gashed himself with stones or self-mutilation. Number seven, he didn't wear clothing for a long time. And number eight, he didn't live in a house. Certainly a very intimidating person, comparable to our to one who is very mentally ill, who may have violent tendencies. Mark says that when the man saw Jesus, he ran up to him and he bowed down before him. The demons are described as having a knowledge of who Jesus is. They are often told to shut up and not tell. Well, James says that the demons believe and tremble, and they know that they are no match for Jesus' power, and they show fear-based respect for Jesus. The kingdom of heaven is manifest in these confrontations with demonic powers, as it is in the context with nature, sin, sickness, death, and violent, forceful humans, or even Satan himself. Luke also says that the man fell before Jesus. He also cried out, Can you imagine the fear in the disciples? They had a pretty stressful night with no sleep, and now being confronted by a very violent, demon-possessed pair with a reputation of crazy behavior. And then they were naked too, and then they were even near the graveyard. Can you imagine the scene? This is the stuff of Halloween movies. The first question of the possessed was, Matthew says, "What do we have to do with you, Son of God?" And Mark says, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Luke says the same. Well, the idea of Most High God has a very, very rich history. If we go back to the days of Melchizedek, he was a priest of the Most High God. See Genesis 14 and also Hebrews 7 and verse 1. And then there was Balaam, the prophet who wanted to prophesy against Israel, but he was not allowed to. He is one who hears God, who hears the Most High God, Numbers chapter 24. And then David was one who was anointed by the Most High God. And then there are various references in the Psalms, Psalm 7, Psalm 46, Psalm 50, 57, 73, 78, 107. All of these have references. In fact, I can tell you, as I'm going through the Old Testament with a more detailed study of this, that the Most High God is found in many, many places in the Old Testament. It's in the story of the three Hebrew children in Daniel chapter 3 and verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged the Most High God in Daniel chapter 4. Daniel acknowledged the Most High in chapter 5 and verse 18 and 21 of his book. And then in Luke 1 and verse 32 regarding Jesus, there is a reference to the Most High God. Mary was overshadowed by the power of the Most High God, Luke chapter 1 and verse 35. And even the servant girl in the book of Acts was that identified Paul as a servant of the Most High God. Now note it has some connection with the Gentiles, a designation of a supreme God as opposed to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The demons seem to ask, Jesus, what is your business with us? Why can't you just leave us alone? These demons were not looking for any communication with Jesus. They did not doubt his power. They did not present any threat to him. They knew that they were outgunned and that they could not intimidate him. So the second question is, according to Matthew, have you come here to torment us before the time? Luke says, I implore you by God, do not torment me. It wasn't really a question. Luke says, I beg you, do not torment me. There are two thoughts here. The demons are destined to be tormented. And number two, there is a designated time for this to happen. This idea of torment comes from a word, let me see if I can spell it for you, Basanisai, I believe. Okay. But it's a word that applies to lapis. Lapis was a stone. Lapis lidius, or a touchstone. It was a stone that was used to help identify other stones. It means to examine or to scrutinize or to try, either by words or by torture, to afflict torment, to be tossed, agitated by the waves. A stone found in Lydia, which when applied to metals was thought to indicate any alloy mixed with them. It was used in the trial of metals. In assaying, certain stones, which are somewhat rough, can be used to determine other metals, such as gold, by rubbing them together or marking. The softer stone, which contains precious metals like gold, silver, or copper, etc., will leave a mark on the touchstone, indicating it is there and the quality of the metal. Then the stone can be melted down, separating out the metals. It seems these demons did not want to go through such a stringent process. It was torture to them to be revealed and called out. They were used to being in control. They had a very strong reaction to Jesus and his power. In Mark chapter 5 and verse 7, Mark has Jesus saying, I adjure you by God. Well, actually, this is, let me see. I believe this is a statement made by the demons themselves. Matthew 5 and verse 7. And seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, what do you have to do with me, Son of the Most High God? I implore, or adjure. So this is the demon that is adjuring Jesus by God. This is a term that is used to describe begging. And it's associated with orkos, an oath, that which is solemnly promised, a vow. It means to adjure, to conjure. It's a strong appeal. It's begging accompanied by an oath, if you will. In Matthew 14:7-9, Herod promised with an oath to give his daughter-in-law, Salome, whatever she wanted, if she would dance for him. In Matthew 26 and verse 72, Peter swore an oath saying that he did not know Jesus. This is the force of what this demon is asking Jesus. In Acts 19 and verse 13, some Jews were trying to exorcise demons by invoking an oath by Jesus' name. It didn't work. So it seems to be, to me, that these demons were very bold to use the name of God in their oath to Jesus. But it also shows how desperate they were to avoid the coming torture. It is used by God himself in Acts 2 and verse 30, Hebrews 6 and verse 16 and 17, where it says that God swore an oath by himself. So what is the nature of this torture that they wanted to avoid? Well, Luke 8:31 says, and they were entreating him not to command them to depart into the abyss. The word is found 7 times in the New Testament. Here, in Romans 10 and verse 7, used in contrast to heaven, the extremes of which one might go to get Jesus, which was unnecessary. We don't need to go up to heaven. We don't need to go down into the abyss. Jesus has come of his own free will, but says to bring Christ up from the dead. The abyss is the place of the dead. The rest are found in the book of Revelation. Revelation 9:11, the angel of the abyss, or Abaddon, or Apollyon. 11:7, the beast comes out of the abyss to make war with the 2 witnesses. In Revelation 17 and verse 8, this beast who comes out of the abyss is not, and about to come up out of it, and was to go to destruction. In Revelation 20 and verse 1, the key to the abyss is with an angel. In 20 and verse 3, Satan is thrown in and shut up for 1,000 years, so that he cannot deceive the nations. So the abyss seems to be some detention place, making it impossible to roam freely. Now, if it is true that Satan is in the abyss now so that he cannot deceive the nations, then he is running his operation, if you will, from prison. And I put a lot of question marks after that as to what is really going on with Satan. The demons are also indicating that they know a time of torture is coming, but like us, they do not know when. Both in Mark and Luke, there is an interesting indication. Mark chapter 5 and verse 8, for he had been saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And Luke 8:29, for he had been commanding the unclean spirit to come out of the man. The picture I get is that Jesus, on entering the scene, is in the process of commanding the unclean spirits to come out, but it had not responded. And this is troubling. Was this like the story of the healing of the blind who was healed in stages? Was this similar to the disciples' experience with failing to exorcise a spirit from a child that comes out by prayer and fasting? Did Jesus inquire as to the name of the spirit because it was not working, and finding out that there were many spirits within him? Legion, it says. And so when he found out that there were many spirits, did Jesus increase his power to cast them out? Did Jesus cast out of the demons from the first man, but needed more time to do so from the second man? I'm not sure any of these make sense to me, but I'm not sure why it is stated as it is either. But the next thing Jesus does is to ask about the name or legion. For we are many, the demon says. A body of soldiers with different numbers. During the time of Augustus, it was maybe something like 6,826 men. That included 61,000 soldiers and 720 horsemen. Wow. Could there have been that many demons in one man? The previous references about the house swept clean and the demons bring 7 more powerful than himself seem nothing in comparison with how many demons were in this man. Jesus could have been up against as many as nearly 7,000 demons. Does this not give a new respect for Jesus' power? Why did so many indwell one man? If demons are the spirits of evil men, then could this have been the residence of some evil city destroyed by God, perhaps even the men of Sodom and Gomorrah? In Mark chapter 5 and verse 10, the demons' first request was not to be sent out of the country. Well, why? What difference would it make to them? Did Satan want this large force here? What would they be in trouble with their boss if they departed out of the country, if Satan had commanded them to be there? But to where? Did these demons come and go individually and indwell others? Were these demons Satan's base in the region to be present whenever Jesus went? There seems to be a lot of people possessed in the places Jesus went, especially in Galilee. So the large herd of swine on the mountain was the focus of Legion. So animals can also be demon-possessed. Does it affect swine the way it affected men? They drowned themselves in the lake. Now this presents other questions. Why would they beg to go into the pigs and then drown the pigs? When the pigs died, where did the demons go? Or did they drown the pigs? Did Jesus do it so that they would have to leave? Mark tells us there were about 2,000 swine, enough for each pig to have 3 or 4 demons each. The text just says the demons entered the swine. It does not say the demons made them rush into the sea. Even if the pigs had not died that day, they were only a temporary solution because they were going to be slaughtered eventually for human consumption. They do not serve any other purpose. And this is all very curious, but what does it tell us about the mind of Jesus? He's very powerful. He can be persuaded by demons when it doesn't countermand his purposes. He may have granted a stupid request to show the demons that they had not really thought this thing through. The herdsmen go and they report this to the town. What a story this must have been. The townspeople came to see what happened, and what did they see? Number one, they saw the demoniac sitting in his right mind, and they saw the pigs floating in the lake. They saw the effects of Jesus' presence. Jesus puts people back together, but the townspeople had learned to live with a crazy man nearby. But many of them had lost their economic investment that day. The desire to see Jesus depart from their region said that they valued 2,000 pigs more than they did one or two demon-possessed men. Again, Jesus is revealing priorities. The Pharisees valued traditions above people. The Gadarenes valued money above people. I wonder if they pulled the pigs out, dressed them out for their meat, or would they have considered them unclean even by pagan standards? They may have been too freaked out to do that, but did they leave them to decompose in the lake? That would be a smelly mess. Or did they bury them? That would be a task. Or burn them? Jesus left a big mess for those people, and yet a man or two sitting in their right mind and able to give glory to God. This puts the outcome into perspective. Luke tells us that the people were gripped with fear. Gripped means is from suneko, S-U-N-E-C-H-O. It means to hold together, to compress, to arrest, compel, perplex even, to afflict, to preoccupy. In Acts 7 in verse 57, it means to cover one's ears, or a shut up and besieged city. Luke chapter 19 verse 43. In 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 14, that we are constrained by the love of God, or we're gripped by love. It means, or it can mean to be seized by a disease, as in Mark chapter 4:24 and Luke 4:38, Acts 28 and verse 8. It is something that grabs a hold of you and won't let go. Fear is phobos, alarm, or fright, or terror. There was something more than economic concerns. These folks did not know how to take Jesus. He was very scary to them. They had learned to live with the demoniac. That's fear. But this new fear was crazy to them. See how much the perspective was skewed? Amazing that people can be more afraid of Jesus than they are the maniacs. Peter said a similar thing in Luke chapter 5. After the catch of fish, he said, "Get away from me, because I am a sinful man." Were they afraid because they knew that they were in the midst of holiness? It could have been a superstitious kind of fear. We fear what we do not understand. Mark and Luke report that the response of this had been demoniac. He wanted to come with Jesus. He was ready to get into the boat. I wonder if anyone brought him some clothes by now. Who wouldn't want to go with Jesus? A man who had lived like this, a man who lived like he did was not concerned about where he was going to sleep or where he might be expected to go. He was stripped to nothing. Perhaps this is a good picture of how a person is prepared for discipleship. Jesus did something out of character. He did not tell the man to keep the miracle quiet. He told him to go and tell. Mark says, "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you." Luke says, "Return to your house and describe what great things God has done for you." Mark's word here means to announce or to bring word, to bring a message. It's a fairly common term. Luke's word is a little different. It means to relate it fully, to describe, to show and tell. to lead through, to recount. There's no significant difference between the two. One is just simply more specific than the other. Mark says that he proclaimed his story throughout the Decapolis, the 10 cities. And Luke says that the whole city heard the word. Everyone marveled at the story he told and what a story he had. So what does this event tell us about Jesus and his mind? Well, first of all, Jesus was fearless, it seems. He demonstrated it in the boat and in the graveyard. Number two, Jesus was powerful. Just as the storm was no match, so in this story, he was able to overpower this powerful human being and also 7,000 demons, no problem. Number three, Jesus was aware of God's timing. It has time for him to die, and it wasn't time to put the demons in the abyss. The next thing we learn is Jesus seems indifferent to the economic impact of his decision to put the demons into the pigs. I'm not sure how to take this, but Jesus didn't seem to care that he destroyed the economy of that little region. And then next is Jesus was merciful to the man or the men that he cast the demons out of. Next, Jesus was decisive in what to do. Jesus didn't have to think about it. He just did it, and he was decisive. Also, Jesus understood the spiritual war that was there. He was not surprised by it. By the way, could this have led some to think about him taking on the Romans? 7,000 troops. Maybe this helped to set Jesus up to be taken by force to become a king, because they heard the story that if he could take on 7,000 demons, maybe he could take on a legion of Roman soldiers. Well, that's that story. Next story will be section 67, the return and the healing of Jairus' daughter and the woman who touched Jesus' garment. So that will be the next story that we will take on. Thank you for joining us today. I know these two sections were a little bit long, but we're trying to cover this material is in a timely way. So thank you for joining us. Go to our website, centralsarasota.org, and you will find a lot of the resources that are available to you. God bless. Take care.